This is part 2 of my New Orleans Mardi Gras trip. It includes Alabama, Mississippi, and Arkansas. So now I had accomplished one of my primary goals, to visit New Orleans during Mardi Gras and Carnival. I'd been there most of Friday, all day Saturday, and it was now Sunday morning. I figured I wouldn't lose much by not actually being there on Mardi Gras the day itself. Now, in my previous travels, I haven't done much traveling in Mississippi and Alabama, so I think that's going to be next on the schedule. I couldn't resist getting this sign about alligators. Don't see too many of these in Palo Alto. Okay, first stop, Mobile, Alabama, and this is Battleship Park with the main attraction, the World War II battleship USS Alabama. But in addition to that, it has got one of the largest displays of military equipment I've seen any place. It's really a good park. A seaplane from the Coast Guard, an M48 Patton tank, a Vietnam-era Huey helicopter, the B-52 Calamity Jane, and they even have a hangar full of exotic planes, including an SR-71. But the main event is clearly the battleship. And they did a really nice job of allowing you to crawl all over it. I think they said you could go 3 decks below the main deck and 7 decks above the main deck. 7 decks above the main deck is just above that radar antenna off to the left by the flags, just above that. But we're going down. Here we go. I assume this is the officers' mess. They had lots of nice exhibits like this. Better to be an officer. But the main event, at least for me, was the guns. And this is the only place that I know where you can actually go up inside of a 16-inch gun turret. You can see the little ladder there on the right. Now, you may wonder about those big ears. There's another one on the other side, but I found out that those ears contain the viewports for a rangefinder, that if the turret has to operate on its own, it can use that rangefinder. More on that later. But now, we're going up. So now we're inside the gun turret itself. And that tube, on that big tube in the upper right, that's the rangefinder tube. So on the back side of that are some eyepieces, and you can look in and get the target that way. On the left and down are the 3 guns themselves. This is inside another turret. This is the one in the rear of the ship. Basically the same setup. And here we're looking down into a gun, the breech of one of the guns itself. And on the lower left is that folding chute that's used to load shells and powder bags into the gun. Here we're on the bow of the ship. You can clearly see those square windows up there for the main bridge. But behind the main bridge is the battle bridge. And you can see how thick, solid steel armor for the battle bridge. Pretty amazing. And that wasn't the only place they had this armor. Well, guess what? They also had a submarine. I didn't take too many pictures here, but I did decide to go aboard. And of course, you always have to take a picture of the periscope. And this is the hatch. Remember in all those World War II submarine movies, they say dive, 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 and close the hatch as they scramble down? This is the hatch. Okay, time to change gears here. From Mobile, I headed north to Montgomery, Alabama. There wasn't much going on there, so I headed west from there to Selma. You probably recognize this bridge, the Edmund Pettus Bridge, from the Civil Rights March with Martin Luther King in 1965. Certainly that's one of Selma's claims to fame. Unfortunately, Selma did not look like it was doing too well. There were few places that were okay, but most of it didn't look too good. It was a real pocket of poverty. It's unfortunate. Anyway, after Selma, I headed north to Birmingham, Alabama. This is the skyline of Birmingham. Unfortunately, it was raining this day, sometimes quite heavily. I visited this historic site. This is a historic blast furnace, which started in the late 1800s. You can see that tall structure on the left there next to the smokestacks. That's one of the two blast furnaces. There's another one behind it. And fascinating learning how they turn iron ore into pig iron. But it was raining, just pouring this day, so I really didn't take any other pictures, but ask me about it sometime. It's fascinating. I did stop by another one of these antebellum southern mansions. This one was called Arlington. And again, they had done up the rooms with period furniture. Really nicely done. Pretty elegant if you lived here, I guess. And an old typewriter. I mean, I'm not sure when this thing, 1861, they had a typewriter. Okay, having visited Birmingham, we now travel west to Tuscaloosa, Alabama, home of the University of Alabama. They're very big on this brick architecture. Everything seems to be done in brick. Even to the point of doing a parking garage in brick like this one here. And of course the football stadium, Crimson Tide. Okay, we're moving again. Time to leave Alabama and head over to Mississippi. There aren't too many big towns or cities in Mississippi as far as I can tell, but certainly the capital, Jackson, is one of them. When I'm traveling, I always like to go to these state capitals. They vary tremendously all over the map. Have you ever seen a state capitol building for Oregon? Boy, what a bleak building, at least from the outside. But the Mississippi State Capitol, this is a good one. This was lots of fun. Very, very, very nicely done. Here's looking up obviously at the main dome and the rotunda. A little bit closer view. Gotta love these. They don't make buildings like this anymore. I think this is the Senate chamber. Well, that was the main event in Jackson. And now I wanted to see what I could see on the Mississippi River. So we're on the road again to Vicksburg. And right on the Mississippi River. And obviously a lot of Civil War history. This is the old county courthouse in the middle of Vicksburg. And a pair of Civil War era cannons out in front of it. And this is the waterfront, panorama shot of the waterfront on the Mississippi by Vicksburg. The Mississippi is completely meandering in this point. It's actually coming at us from the far distance and going off to our left. And on the right is the Yazoo River, which goes up by the waterfront for Vicksburg. This is a close-up of a couple of the workboats that were on the river that day. I really wanted to see a lot of the Mississippi, but it was kind of funny. You couldn't get near it. It was so much lowlands, there just weren't any roads, so the only place you could get near it were places where there was a bridge going over it, or a waterfront like this. But this was only maybe a quarter mile that I could actually get a view of the bridge, or a view of the river. Downtown Vicksburg, the wrought iron balconies reminded me a little bit of New Orleans. Then I went over the river. At this point, it's still Louisiana. This is the small town of Delta, Louisiana. Just wanted to point out there are an awful lot of people out there that are still living a double-wide existence, or in this case, it even looks like a single-wide existence. And these people are living right in the shadow of the Mississippi River. This is the Delta. You can see the town. This is the Delta. This is the levee. You can see the town of Delta off to the right. There's some wetlands off to the left, and maybe another 100 yards, 200 yards off to the left is the main levee, and that's the Mississippi River. So these folks are clearly, any type of flooding, they're in the front lines. Okay, time to hit the road again. From Louisiana, I headed north into Arkansas, and the first big stop was Hot Springs National Park in Hot Springs, Arkansas, and Bathhouse Row. I always knew Hot Springs from, when FDR used to go there to battle polio. I looked it up on Google. That was Warm Springs, Georgia. Oh well. But Hot Springs was obviously once a very elegant place with all these bathhouses right along Bathhouse Row. And back behind these bathhouses was a hill and kind of a long ridge. And that's where the water just kind of poured out of that ridge and it was available for all these bathhouses to pick up. Down one end to the left of where we're looking here, there was a city park. You can see the water up top there just coming out of the side of the hill and gathering in these pools, and you can stick your hand in. It was hot. It was hot tub hot. I think the sign said 104 degrees. It was hot. But these bathhouses were quite something. I guess their heyday was in the early 1900s. A couple of them are still open as bathhouses, but most of them have been converted to stores or museums. This one here, Cultural Center. Quapaw Baths. I think this is one of their two that are still functioning as bathhouses. I think this is one of them. And this one, which is, I can't read it, it's the Fordyce bathhouse. This is the visitor center. A very elegant bathhouse, and they let you tour through it. And very nicely done. Lots of nice displays. You can kind of get an idea of the crowd that was using these facilities. And attire for the ladies. A different era. Very well presented here as a museum. And they had some different ideas about what would be good therapies. Here's the hydrotherapy room with all kinds of weird equipment. including this contraption. Boy, I don't think I'd want to turn my back on this thing. And of course, you could take a steam bath. They had a whole row of them. It was very well done. Oops, back in the truck again, and head from there up to the state capital of Little Rock, Arkansas. This looks like a decent building. I got there too late in the evening to go inside. Interesting looking streetcar. And of course, Little Rock has Bill Clinton's presidential library. Interesting looking building, cantilevered out over the river there. Okay, leaving Little Rock, I headed north and west up into the Ozark Mountains and the Ozark National Forest. This is my campsite the next night. When I was in my 20s, I went through the Ozarks. I was very impressed with them, but for some reason it just didn't have the appeal this time. I'm not sure if it was the time of year or the rainy weather or what, but this is a typical National Forest campsite for me. And my final slide from Arkansas, just to show you the best price I got for gasoline on the entire trip. In this case, $2.31 for diesel. This is just outside of Fort Smith, Arkansas. From here, it's on to Dallas and part 3 of my trip.